When do you in fact plan to, I asked you this question the other day, when do you in fact plan to record with the Beatles again?
At the moment, there is no plan whatsoever, and we have this film and album in the can, and until that's sorted out, there won't be any plans, And I plan to make an album with Yoko, with Phil Spector, in about 2 weeks, so that's my plan. I heard Paul was planning to do an LP too,
By 1970, the Beatles began the process of splitting up and embarking on their solo careers. Paul would pull himself out of a depression to release his first solo album, John would begin Primal Therapy, George would release a triple album to great success, and Ringo would release 2 solo albums. This is the story of the Beatles through 1970. January begins with the final recordings for the Let It Be sessions. John, who's in Denmark, states, all the money earned from the record will go towards promoting peace on Earth. While in Denmark, he and Yoko cut their hair short. Meanwhile, in order to stop trespassers on his farm, Paul purchases the land next to him. He now owns High Park Farm and Low Park Farm. As the month ends, John writes, records and mixes Instant Karma in one day. At the same time, Alan Klein is convicted of tax evasion. February 4th, John and Yoko swap a bag of their hair for Muhammad Ali's blood-stained shorts. They plan to auction the shorts for charity. 2 days later, Instant Karma is released. Meanwhile, with dozens of teenagers, mostly girls, congregating outside Paul's St. John's Wood home, he and neighbours lodge a complaint. John then records a live performance of Instant Karma for Top of the Pops. The month ends with John and Yoko refusing to perform at the Toronto Peace Festival due to a disagreement over whether there should be a charge for admission. The festival will never take place. A week later, Paul designs his cover for McCartney. Linda takes 40 pictures of him in different poses. They can't decide which one to use and ask their friend who works in advertising. He chooses a shot of Paul with his daughter Mary. For the back cover, they choose a picture of glacé cherries that had been taken by Linda previously. The back cover later becomes the front cover and vice versa. The album is scheduled for release on April 10th. The single Let It Be is released with the B-side You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. At this time, Paul is sent a remixed copy of The Long and Winding Road. The record comes with a note from Alan Klein saying he thought the changes were necessary. Paul is furious with the alterations. He later tells a journalist, I would never have women singing on a Beatles record. 6 days later, George and Patty leave their bungalow in Surrey and move into Friar Park. The mansion contains 35 acres of land. At this time, John does an interview with French magazine L'Express in which he reveals the Beatles smoked marijuana in the toilets of Buckingham Palace when they received their MBE. John later announces he and Yoko are expecting a baby. Yoko later miscarries again. March 27th, Ringo's first solo album Sentimental Journey is released. As the month ends, Alan Klein hears of Paul's solo album and has it postponed to June 4th in order to release Let It Be first. When Paul hears about this, he goes berserk, phones George and tells him he wants to be removed from Apple Records. George replies, "You'll stay on this f***ing label, Harry Krishna," then hangs up. In the following days, Ringo goes to Paul's St. John's Wood home with a letter from John and George. Paul goes berserk and the two almost come to blows. Paul then throws him out. April 9th, Paul sends early copies of his solo album to the press. The album contains a questionnaire written by Paul suggesting the Beatles have split. A day later, newspaper headlines read, "Paul is quitting the Beatles." Soon after, the Apple company released a statement neither confirming or denying the split of the Beatles. It reads, "Although it is true that there are plans at the moment for no more Beatles recordings, this is quite normal. Next month their new LP will be issued. it has already been recorded, so consequently, as there is already material available, there are no plans for more recordings. One day later, Paul and Linda, along with their 2 children and dog Martha, travel to his Scottish home. While there, Paul will fall into a depression, drinking daily and sometimes for breakfast. Meanwhile, John is going through a depression himself. He stays at home watching endless television. He focuses more on the commercials than the actual shows. John is fascinated by commercials. They sometimes give him lines for songs. While at home, he and Yoko begin bickering often. John is bad news for anyone when he's in a bad mood, and Yoko is no exception. He often stays in a self-imposed silence for hours. Many people who know John later attest to this. His father's girlfriend said he would barely speak. His former chauffeur said he never spoke a word. Encouraged by Yoko to deal with his problems, John begins reading a book titled The Primal Scream. With his enthusiasm for any new fad, John is soon hooked. The theory of primal therapy is that trauma comes from experiences as a child and even during birth. John and Yoko contact the author and begin therapy sessions in the States. John's trauma is seen as so severe, treatment will last a minimum of 1 year. At the same time, George is interviewed for the BBC show Fact or Fantasy. He speaks about meditation and spirituality. The Beatles' current situation is never spoken about. 4 days later, Paul writes a letter to Alan Klein warning never to interfere with one of his songs again. 5 days later, a music video for Maybe I'm Amazed is released. The video contains stills taken by Linda. May 8th, the Let It Be album is released. 6 days later, the Let It Be film is released. At this time, George begins recording sessions for All Things Must Pass. June 15th, Paul's father-in-law Lee Eastman sends a letter to Alan Klein insisting the Beatles be dissolved immediately. Klein doesn't reply. When asked, George states the group could get together for 3 months a year to do 1 album or 2. At this time, John begins recording his album, John Lennon Plastic Ono Band. Influenced by his primal therapy sessions, he writes songs about his father and deceased mother. As the month ends, Cynthia Lennon remarries at Kensington Registry Office. 7th of July, George's mother Louise dies. George delays work on All Things Must Pass to travel to Liverpool to see her for one last time. As August begins, news of the Beatles documentary titled The Long and Winding Road is announced. At this time, Ringo completes his 2nd album. 25th of September, Bukus of Blues is released. During September, John's visa expires and he's forced to leave the US and stop his primal therapy. The author of the book fears Lennon leaving therapy early leaves John's rediscovered anger over his childhood issues unresolved. October 9th, Paul is pictured sporting a new look. While on a cruise to New York, a woman gets angry and insists he remove his sunglasses while at a dining table. Paul responds, "I'm on holiday, I'll do what I want." While in New York, Paul begins work on his 2nd solo album. Through the rest of the month, Paul auditions drummers and guitarists. On the same day that Paul is pictured in New York, it's John's 30th birthday. He invites his father to his house only to go berserk at him. In a tirade, John compares himself to Jimi Hendrix and other recently dead rock stars before calling himself insane. This is the last time John will see his father. At this time, Paul was desperate to be free of Apple Records. Alan Klein plans to trap Paul and tells the other Beatles to invite Paul to a recording session for Ringo's song Early 1970. Should Paul attend, it would show he's still in a musical partnership with the three and undermine any future lawsuits. Paul does not accept the invitation. 27th of November, All Things Must Pass is released. December 11th, John Lennon Plastic Ono Band is released. At the same time, Paul and George meet to discuss their differences. The meeting does not go well. The year ends with Paul filing a lawsuit against the three Beatles, hoping to end their contractual partnership. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel. If you wish to donate, it would be greatly appreciated, as this is my main source of income. Just click the three symbols next to the video, then the thanks icon, and however much you wish to donate. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for my next video.